Hello, welcome to Real Women NZ. Great to see we already have an audience.
Good
Hello,
evening, everybody.
nice to see you, Azian.
Good to see you, Helen. How are you?
I'm well.
Awesome.
The audience, great to see you tonight. We have a special guest who is, we'll bring him into the studio shortly. Would you like to introduce him, Azian, or would you like me to do that?
Yes. So I've only just met David Langford, and he was a school principal for over 30 years. He's worked in several different primary schools as a teacher at all levels, and then later as a principal, including a year in Ottawa where he was a principal for a year of quite a large school. So David has retired in 2019, but even up until then has seen some significant changes in our education system from way back when it was more community led, and then later came from a more centralized government instruction kind of system. So there's a lot of interesting questions that we've got for him, and later on please put in your questions as well. Yeah.
Fantastic. So I'll bring David into the studio, and welcome, David. Nice to have you on board with us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, good evening, David. Great to have you. So, David, would you like to give us a brief background? Just, when you became a teacher, how long you've worked as a teacher, and then also how long you've worked as a principal.
I'm a product of the early 1970s at the university, and that might speak for itself. The hair was a little longer. We were quite forthright in our views. You could argue that we were quite socialist, which is complete opposite nowadays for me. But I ended up, I come from Gisborne, and being in Wellington, we thought the weather was better in Gisborne. So after marriage, we came back to Gisborne. I was a teacher in primary school and intermediate school. I did a family of farmers, so I took a couple of years out after about 8 or 9 years, and then was involved in farming, but came back as a rural school principal for 4 years, and then came into town at a primary school in Gisborne. I was there for 29 years. Plus, I did a year. I did a year as a principal advisor, a secondment, and I also working for Waikato University, and I also did a year as a teacher in teacher exchange in Canada, in Ottawa. So that's about it. Yeah, and I've still sustained my engagement in education through an education consultancy.
29 years in one school. Is that what you were saying?
Correct. Other than the odd break I did a year with Waikato as a secondment and a year away in Canada.
So you would have taught a couple of generations of the same family. Would that be right?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
I taught children and I taught their grandchildren. Well, yes. I didn't teach them. I had their grandchildren in our school, yes.
Wow, nice. Extensive and really impressive experience. So thank you for coming on tonight so that we can ask you some questions about all of the experience that you have had with this school system. And from our brief conversation before, you told me a little bit how things changed, and you mentioned the year 1989. So can you tell us a little bit what was before in place and then what changed at that year?
Yes, I mentioned that 1989. Well, it was the introduction of tomorrow's schools. And if you look at the political situation at that time, there was David Longie's government was there, and they decided that government. So it's interesting that it's the Labor government. They decided to do away with the Department of Education, which was like the old Ministry of Education, and divulge the governance of schools into the community, where we have boards. As most people know, every school has 5 representatives, and the board voted every 2 or 3 years. I think you can have half. You have basically every 3 years a democratic election. You have a teacher rep, which is voted on the board, and you secondary schools have a student rep on the board. So governance is in that community. It's not top down. Now, since 1989, it's the Ministry of Education was very small. There was a good example of how we could deal with the ministry would be if our school rolls were on the increase. In Gisborne, I could phone one person at the national office in Wellington, in Lower Hutt, and I'd say, my roll has gone up 4 or 5 students. I need an extra 0.1 of a staffing entitlement, please. And he'd say, right, good, yep, all done. And that was it. Nowadays, it's so controlled. There's not that personal touch. There's nothing there. And you're battling a bureaucracy. And that crept in over the years. And it is, and then, of course, you get over the years the influence of what the boards of trustees can do. Now, so the government has increased their influence over boards by changing the national guidelines and so on that they have to operate under. And then, of course, you get this curriculum change coming through, such as a curriculum refresh, and that is not, in the old days it would have been, hey, what will be the curriculum for our community, we would say as a board. Nowadays you say, well, what will be for our community, but these are the parameters and they're very narrow, because you've got all these other stuff, documents, that expensive documents being presented to boards saying, this is what you've got to stick to. Hence, we have the problem today of losing control, community control of schools and what is taught, and not only what is taught, but the values that are inculcated to our students, which is devaluing the influence of the parents. So that is a change that I've noticed, and it is, to my mind, scary.
Thank you for sharing that, David. We have a lot of questions from, there's a bit of an echo. We have a lot of questions from parents asking how to approach boards around this whole gender, and all of this stuff. But it sounds to me like what you're saying is the boards don't really have a lot of control over this area. So in other words, it really is the Ministry of Education that we have to challenge, that parents have to challenge. It's not going to be enough just to go to the boards. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, I think the boards, yes, definitely the boards are in the middle. So yeah, you've also got in primary schools, I don't mean to denigrate young people being on boards, but sometimes it's the first time that somebody's been on a board and they might be 23 years old, and they have no experience, because there's finance, there's policy, there's HR, there's complaints, there's all sorts of things that come at the board level. It requires a vast amount of skill, knowledge, ability to be an effective board member. And you can have board members that are not used to it, and so there's a learning curve that takes a wee while to get into it. And so they can be easily intimidated by what ministry or legislation that comes in. Oh, legislation says we've got to do this. Health and safety is a big one in schools. I mean, and as it should be, of course. But the nuances around health and safety and the vulnerability of boards and principals and indeed teachers is huge. So we need to appreciate that boards have got a vast role to play in governance, and they're going to be quite young people because they've got young kids, and they may be in have a lacking in any business experience, lacking in an ability to debate around a table and have conversations which are more learning type conversations than having arguments. Everybody we know, I've never been on a board that there has been where there's been a person that's got on there mischievously. They've always been sincere. They've always wanted to do the best for their students. So I would say we've got to look above.
Thank you for pointing that out. I really, it's given me some food for thought to know that, it's true. Some of these would be the first time on a board, would be young parents, and are lacking some of that experience, right? And what to do with being a board member and a committee member. So thank you. That was important for me to hear. And so then you said something about how you also were in a forum, right? You were on a forum around education.
In 2013, the national government, the Minister of Education, Heke Parata, had a forum which I was involved in, and we met down in Wellington. It was for over a few years, and I believe it was quite effective because it was the minister talking with community people, principals, unions, principals associations. There were business people involved. There were iwi connections, and we were all in the same room. And we were discussing things outside the ministry civil service. So we weren't talking straight with the secretaries of education and the hierarchy within the ministry. And so there was an opportunity for people to really speak out. And I thought it was something that I caught on to in terms of, hey, we seem to have a government that's trying to listen, but however, there were some learnings for me in terms of the narrative from some quarters, not so much not from the minister, but because I felt at the time she was really listening, but I felt that there were some groups within that forum who had other agendas which they weren't prepared to shift from. And one was, and it surprised me because I'm from a pretty isolated area of the country, and so we miss a lot of stuff. But the idea of globalism in 2011, 12, 13, I think it was, around that period, 2013, I thought, what's this globalism got to do with it? It's got nothing to do with Tairāwhiti, our area. It's got nothing to do with my whānau, my community, my parents, my school, our school. And why do we need to listen to these people from OECD? Why do we need to listen to these people from over here? We actually had the OECD here for one of our forums. I went to it. And so and then out of the OECD comes conversation, not out of the OECD, sorry, I've misrepresented, not necessarily the OECD, but out of the globalism narrative, we had other narratives come out, which included stuff which my community wouldn't like, such as transgenderism, do I dare say it, or losing control, teachers giving ideas in kids' heads, which their whānau had no idea that this was something that was being pushed from outside their own values. That was the.
So can you tell us a bit more? Who was pushing that? Who was pushing that narrative?
It wasn't so much pushing at that point. It was a subtle part of dialogue, of conversation. Mm-hmm. And then since 2013, it's become more overt. It's become, you would say, oh, here's a document. Look what it's saying here. Well, that's a bit over the top. and then everything would go quiet. Everybody would talk about some sort of titchy issue that crossed some lines of our own community's values. And then you think, oh, what do we do with that? And we'll ignore it. And so we'd quieten down.
So do you think it was more like sneakily kind of put in a little bit and a little bit and a little bit?
What else can you say?
So incrementally is basically what they've done, isn't it? Over since that time. So,
and then David, they did what? It's incremental for a bit, and then it's intense for a bit, and it drops off, and that's how we're manipulated. There, I've used the word manipulate.
And you talked about global institutions. I mean, you've got the tentacles of many global institutions around lots of our New Zealand, everything really. And that's something that some of us are pushing back, But when it comes to our education system, I mean, we know that this has taken a long time to get to this level in New Zealand. For example, I don't know whether you're aware, when I put the petition out, I spoke at Parliament, and MP Kieran McNulty at the time said he didn't think New Zealand had a problem and that I was using data from overseas, as if they don't use data from overseas for some of their policies, etc. But, we knew that this was going to come here even more so, and it's taken a little bit longer, but it has been slowly, incrementally brought into the school policy to the point where just in the last 5 years, it has gone. It's just overrun everything, every aspect, like the teacher training, for example. Now, you said, what year did you finish up as a principal?
End of 2018. Yeah. I've been involved. I've been consulting at schools, so I still go into schools. I still deal with issues that schools are having. And
so you would know that there's teacher training happening now where they have, you talked about the transgender stuff. So you've got the Inside Out particular group. You talked about groups. That's one of the groups who are really forceful in the teacher training now, even to the point that in schools with our professional development in the staff rooms, you may have come across this, or, you may not know about it, but they were pushing to have educators, teachers who've been teaching for decades, re-educated around diversity and inclusive, as if teachers have never been inclusive before. So have you seen this?
Yes, I have. And I have a daughter that's also a secondary school teacher, and a son-in-law, and of course I've got most of my best friends are ex-principals or still principals. So there's a lot of conversation behind the scenes around these concerns that many parents have got, because you've got to remember we're parents or grandparents as well ourselves. And so I read the sexuality documentation that Inside Out had produced for the government, I understand, and I was shocked. I was disturbed by it from one factor alone, and that was they were giving advice to teachers to manipulate and devalue the input of a parent or whānau on the child's values. And I thought, now that has never ever happened. We would, if a parent comes to your school and says, look, I don't like the way this is happening at the school, you'd say, oh goodness, I better investigate it and find out what it's about. And sometimes you'd need to apologize. I don't know how you could say this has arisen and I can understand it. I'm extremely sorry, because we've really breached trust between you, your child, and us. We don't want to tell you how your child should turn. What values should they have? So for a system to teach teachers to breach a confidential, trusting relationship between a parent and a teacher is disgusting.
Thank you, David. I've been talking about this for the last 5 years. Thank you so much as a school leader for actually coming out online in public saying exactly that. So I really appreciate you doing this. And, you know, I hope that we get to have a lot more conversations around this so that we can make public aware that, you know, you as a school leader for so many, you know, over 3 decades, and, you know, you're still involved, you're training principals, and you are saying the exact thing that we've been concerned about. So I hope that, you know, this video gets shared far and wide so that other educators can actually see this and know. And you know, it's taken a while though, David, because a lot of people didn't know. A lot of teachers didn't know, David. 5 years ago, I had a principal contact me, someone I went to Teachers College with, and he said to me, "Are we supposed to be teaching this stuff?" And I said, I don't know, that sounds like there's a C in the background. I'm sorry. But he said, there's, yeah, he didn't even know about it. And I said, have you not seen the document from the Ministry of Education, you know, the sexuality guidelines? And he said he hadn't had it sent to his school. So it's taken a while for other school leaders and teachers to even see that this is actually factual, that this is happening. It's really been, I think Azian mentioned it before, a bit seductive or secretive even, you know, that this hasn't been out there transparent to everyone.
Yeah, sneaky,
yeah,
hey? Yes.
Jump in as just a bit of clarification. I don't actually train principals, but I'm more of a mentor for some principals who are navigating their own way through this sort of stuff. And because they're having to, they've been put in a situation they don't enjoy, and they don't know how to do it. They don't know how to do this. And my sympathy is with every teacher, with every principal in this country at the moment.
I'm just going to throw up a question or a comment from one of the audience. Louise has said, breach of trust is exactly right. It's so sad. Yeah, and so Louise, you heard it right here from, you know, from one of the school leaders, and it's great that he's saying that this is what we have been talking about, the breach of trust. Do you know that the Teachers Council are sanctioning people like myself, and I'll talk about a teacher who was deregistered yesterday. They're sanctioning us under discipline for, they use the term that we are doing these things around, you know, the breach of trust, which is completely opposite. They're turning it back around on us. And what we are doing is actually being honest and transparent, and find it, like you said, absolutely disgusting that teachers can tell children this information. It's criminal. It really is criminal, David. And Charmaine has said, can the board reject the woke? Hold on, where are we? Can the board reject the woke curriculum? Okay, what's your response to that, David?
I think it takes guts, but if you have some clarity in your own mind, if a board is together on this and has some unity around it, it's a real challenge, because there's, you know, you might have 6 or 7 of you. Boards can sometimes have other people around the table as well. It's very hard to get full agreement on anything. But you sometimes just you go with the flow a little bit. So what I think you can do is make sure you have these conversations, and try not to shoot from the hip too quickly. So that, because, you know, at the end of the day, we love each other, and we like each other, and we want to get on together, and we certainly love the kids who are growing up in our school. And you know, kids are vulnerable in a society as we have today, with the influences that go around in the digital space, on the internet, and use it. It's mind-boggling. So we've got to understand that they've got to have, the teachers and the board have got to gain the trust of their community, so that they're representing them accurately. You will always get somebody with, you know, the term woke. Sometimes it's scary because you get cancelled because immediately they'll accuse you of not loving one of your kids because they may be effeminate. A little boy might be effeminate. So and I've had that experience. It's where children are very effeminate, or a little girl is a tomboy and they're going for it in a pre-pubertal state. And we've never, ever gone and told them you shouldn't be playing in the netball team because you're a boy. We've put them in the blinking netball team. Have a good time. A couple of years later, they're playing rugby again or whatever. They move around. And it's about being sensible. It's about not going outside the parameters of getting angry and so angry that it turns into a form of hate. You got to know that you come from a position of really underneath loving however anybody seems to appear in terms of their we know there's boys, we know there's girls, there's genders. Biological boy, biological girl. End of story. Yep. But there's certain behaviours that can be a little bit fluid, if you like, but it is another step to go further and to start saying, you're really trans, you're really this. So I would say at that point, if I was the leader of the school, no. And if you don't accept this, I'm driving out of this gate and I'm not coming back, because I personally think it's wrong. And I think if a board can stand up to it, what are they going to do collectively if you stand up? What is the government going to do? What's the ministry going to do?
Yeah, you put that's the key point. But we all need to stand up. So the principals need to stand together. The boards need to stand together. There's no point in one school trying to fight it. So, for example, 2 years ago, I had contact from a principal up in the North Island. They were having a lot of trouble with the Ministry of Education around the neutral uniforms and the toilets. Okay, and that's because they had a transgender student. Now, obviously, when one school is being challenged by the ministry, it can be quite an isolating experience and hard to navigate that. So I suppose if we've got people listening from school leaders, I suppose it's about you guys actually having those conversations together and coming together and then standing up in your area of influence to push it back on the government and stop this. Like you said, say no. Chris Hipkins, not that long ago, I think it was him, talked about the fact that there's some groups that have had far too much influence around the government. And I'm thinking, yeah, I'm pretty sure he'd know about that even before he was the Prime Minister. And we know which groups they are. So that needs to be stopped. To have one group that was given so much power and control over government decisions, they have a room in there, not just like, I think as somebody was a bit confused last time I said that. I don't mean just a room where any trans or confused gender people in Parliament go to. I'm talking about a room where they all get together and plan and do policy and, push this stuff into other areas of our community policy. Yeah. How much power and control they've been given and money.
Yeah, that brings us back, to the question, where does it come from, right? Because that's really what I am interested in. So if it's not coming from the boards, it's coming from the Ministry of Education, I assume. Would you say that is correct, David?
What I would say is, within the civil service of the ministry, where are the influences coming from? I don't know. To hear that Inside Out has a group already in Wellington, in the Beehive or wherever it is, and they're having meetings lobbying people, individuals within the ministry, within the bureaucracy, of course there's going to be an influence. Then there's, and how do I say this without being too divisive, how do the ministry choose their employees? Do they think we're going down this track? Therefore, we need these sorts of people with these sorts of beliefs. So, but we're not going to have these people because their views are too conservative or whatever.
That's good. That's good. So the minister, Chris Hipkins, when he was the education minister for the last elections around the teaching council, he put some statements out there about when they were going to select and interview people. And there was one particular person who was running for the position, and he was one of the teachers who had put together a little campaign to try and have me deregistered, would you believe? So some people went back to make sure that the council that were electing new people to come on board knew that this particular person, they might have already known that, but it matters to the community that they are aware when papers come out to elect new people for government positions on the teacher council, on those that are working with the ministry. We need to know who they are. You need to look into them. And you're right. It's like, do they have a conservative background? Do they have a liberal? Are they with the rainbow community? You have to do due diligence before these people are selected. Now, there's a really good comment, and we talked about this recently around there's been a campaign to create more diverse boards, encouraging people from the rainbow community to apply. Do you want to talk to that? Do you know much about it? And I'm just going to race and get my charger because my laptop's almost out of charge. I've been talking too much. So carry on.
In terms of, there's some advantages of having a diversity on a board of trustees. There's not a problem with that. But when you particularly pick out an issue and say that's what we need on, then you need to ask the question, well, what about this bit and that bit and this bit? So there's in diversity. There's a lot in diversity. It's not just about two or three issues. It's about a myriad of issues. It's good to have on a board of trustees who have people that have practical skills in business to manage finance. It's good to have people on boards of trustees that might have some experience with employment issues. There's important human rights issues are important. And
it's such a valid point, David, that the diversity is really a good thing, right? That we have so many different backgrounds, yes. And especially nowadays, where New Zealand is such a multicultural place, it is super important that we have these different groups being represented on school boards and boards in general. So I really like that you point that out.
So if in terms of someone's asked the question around the rainbow community, is it I would not be offended to have somebody from and that is gay to be on my board of trustees. Not at all.
No, I don't think that's the point. The point is what they were saying is that they actually have to have a rainbow person or a gender diverse person on the board when that's not even representative of a school. What would you say? When you're selecting people, why does it have to be a gender neutral person? Or I mean, that's like saying you have to have this culture, you have to have that culture. How can we make that as a rule or as a law mandated?
What would be interesting is to find out, within the community, to have some conversations for a principal or board to have conversations around how shall we make up our board in terms of diversity. What skills, identify the needs that community has and see what best collection of people you can to get the best out of the governance of the school. And,
exactly. That's what Charmaine has said. Why can't people be chosen just on ability? And that's no different than where we're talking about the gender equality around, they're talking about that the Parliament has the finally over 50% representation of females. I mean, in my opinion, I don't actually think that that's so amazing to celebrate. I think if those 50 plus women aren't as highly qualified as the male, they shouldn't be there. You know, for example, it needs to be the best people, you know, those who have the ability in certain areas that you need. You're not going to put a female in actually I'll probably be stereotyping if I say that, but I'm pretty sure you understand what I'm saying. We want the best people. We don't just want to fill a quota of, you know, making sure that the numbers, going. So thank you, Charmaine.
Yeah, I agree with it. And the other point that I really find, kind of weird is that these people are actually then selected by their sexual preference more than their skills as a business leader or as a, you know, someone who understands education. I mean, for me, that's just a bit strange, because when have we ever started selecting people just by, you know, their preferences or by their pronouns? It's all gone very I don't know. I find that strange sometimes. But But the inclusivity, I get it that we want a diverse school board that is representing the community. I get that, and I find that is a really good point that you made there, David. But yes, absolutely selecting people on merit rather than on their intersectionality.
And you talked about health and safety before, David, health and safety around the board. What about health and safety of our young people? So Bronnie has made a comment. She understands that the board is running a business. How seriously do they take the concept of do no harm? You know, do they realize they may be liable for, you know, some of the stuff that's being pushed? You've got a lot of people that are detransitioning now, and they were encouraged and affirmed in the school system. So there will be court cases. I'd be very concerned with, you know, if I was a board of trustee or even an educator now in the school system where you have been feeding into the lie of affirming children, sticking them, you know, locking them into an identity that might be incorrect.
It's a big jump to assume that you have the right to shift somebody's thinking in radical ways, no matter what it is. We want to leave that to somebody else in the family, the whānau. They're the ones that should be guiding the deepest heartfelt values that they want their kids to have growing up. It's pretty hard raising kids, you know, and teenagers. All of us who've raised teenagers and so on, the job is pretty difficult anyway. To have everybody having a go at it, as well as you, can be very confusing for kids and can have long-lasting damage to their well-being. You know, we know that. I'm sick and tired. I've got sick and tired of going to tangi of young children who have taken their own lives. And when you get down to it, they've really not understood their value in community with other people. And there can be a multitude of reasons why that's happened. There can be trauma in the family somewhere along the line. There's no real common factor, but we need, if we're the leaders in a school, we need to be sensitive to these dynamics that are happening to our kids. We often, in my generation, our grandparents were very important in our lives. And I would say that my grandparents were the ones that gave me my current values. And my parents were working hard, they were farmers, and they were. But my grandmother was the one that made sure that I didn't swear around the table and that I had good manners when I ate the food, and those sorts of things were values that our family all had. And we now know that families have broken down a lot. So the influence of previous generations have reduced. So our kids currently have a lot more vulnerability in a social school setting where they don't really know where possibly they need to be in space. So let's be sensitive about it, and let's encourage them, and let's let them know we love them dearly. And excuse me, my phone is going. But we've got
That's
to
right.
be really sensitive to the needs of our kids. End of story.
Yeah, I agree. And while there are a lot more social issues, it's still not the responsibility of a school to step in and be the parent, right? And that's one thing that we do not approve of as parents or grandparents, that they can just pick up the role, absolutely, to provide support for individual students, but not take on the role of parent or nannies for all of our students. That's just not on. And you're talking about the safety of these children. It was written somewhere recently, 57% of children over the last six years have been on or are on some form of anti-anxiety medication. Now that is horrific. I interviewed a young student who talked about some of these issues that are affecting him and his friends in school. We need to listen to these children, not by the woke stuff, though, and actually listening to them telling us that they have a different identity. That's just them being fed information through social media, and then they are coming out with all these claims. Like you said, David, it's like, say, no, this is who you are. We want to love you for who you are. You don't need to be changing yourself to fit something that's actually not who you are. So I'll grab a couple of these other questions, David. There's quite a few here. So if we just focus on that at the moment. Gender is a social construct. Don't like using gender ideology language because it empowers them. Yeah, I agree. That's why I refuse to be called a cis, because I cannot stand that word cis. It's a made up. I'm a woman, not a cis woman. So, yeah, we don't really like using their language. I agree, Virginia. And Charmaine, maybe your fluid stance is permissive and allowing the kids to go down the wrong road. Kids need boundaries. I'm not sure where you talked about the fluid stuff, but yeah, I do agree. But we do have to be careful, Charmaine, as we are, talking to our children about what is going on.
I liked how David was saying about being sensitive towards the issues, right? But there has to be a difference between indoctrinating and pushing their own agenda onto these children. And there's a big difference between being sensitive and being, really mindful of what these kids are going through. And like you said, today, it must be so hard being a young person in today's world with all the social media and everything that is happening around them. But for then the teachers to push them further into that artificial world of, you can be anything, right? Tomorrow you can be a boy and the next day you can be a girl. And these poor children, like you said, they're so vulnerable at that stage. And that's one of the reasons why we're doing this, to raise the awareness around those issues, and that these teachers can do this nowadays without having to inform the parents. That I find that very, very scary.
You've raised some really good points there. If we look at how schools can will intervene in situations which are really challenging with the well-being of kids, we learned because we at our school we had a large proportion of students with special needs of some kind. We had, I think, one year we had over 20 students who were autistic, and we had a lot of children with ADHD, and of course these behaviours can erupt in a school and destabilise the school if you're not doing the right thing. We learnt as a staff, we learnt through attending workshops and going to experienced authorities, international research to find out how best to deal with these extreme behaviours that surfaced in the school. And and they're extremely complex. But we were looking for some simple solutions that we could understand. It's because you get put in a situation in a school where you get forced into taking some action, which actually causes rejection of students. So if you stand them down or send them home, exclude them from school, and we didn't want to do that. So we learnt that no matter what conditions, labels that you might put on kids, there's two things that happen that you can work on. One is anxiety, and the other one is when you have anxiety, there are social interactions, there are difficulties with social interactions. So if you have teachers and people in the school, teacher aides and people working, that you have upskilled yourselves in looking at the antecedents to behaviours, what's happening before them, you can actually reduce anxieties early and then they don't peak. And we found that over a very short time, there was no stand downs, no school exclusions, because the senior staff and teachers and teacher aides developed the skills to deal with anxiety in students. And anxiety can move during the day. So it could happen in the morning where families are dropping their children off at school. There's arguments at the gate and the children come to school pretty rough. Now, the same goes for any situation. If you have some anxiety happening and you have skilled people around you that have calming activities, it could be a game of sport, it could be a child just wanting to be on their own in a quiet space, it could mean they play with some Lego or a soft toy, whatever it is. But the teachers getting to know the students really well and knowing what calms them can make a very peaceable place. We don't need top down. We need bottom up skilled teachers, and any teacher that is listening will know that more often than not, they're under a great deal of pressure with larger numbers of kids, with trying to solve many problems simultaneously. So we need a focus in education around these issues, not this other stuff that you're talking about.
Agree. I just want to jump in here. For the last 10 minutes, David, you've said fantastic things, but for the last 10 minutes, I just want to focus on something that happened yesterday. Now, and we're going to go with a few people who haven't actually been putting comments up. So just before we go to Carl's comment, yesterday what happened is a teacher was deregistered. I don't know whether everybody here is aware of that, but we learned that the Teachers Council terminated the right to teach for a teacher who would not follow the Ministry of Education's dictates that teachers call a student by their preferred gender identity. Did we see this coming? Well, yeah, some of us did. So it's happened here in New Zealand, and I know this has happened overseas, and I know that a particular teacher won their case and they won a lot of money and were reinstated. So I imagine that this teacher will be getting some advice from the lawyer. Well, I hope so. Actually, if he's out there or if anyone knows him, please get him to contact me, because I want to have a chat with him about some other areas. I'd be really happy to talk with him further, because he's not the only teacher who's actually out there that does not want to teach the stuff that is being dictated and mandated. Carl's talked about, hang on, where are we? Carl has said, and thank you, welcome to the panel, Carl. Great to have men on here as well who are looking out for women and children as well as their own families. Sorry, I've just lost his comment. Where are you? Right. I recall an incident of a teacher that tried to solicit a gang member to kneecap a principal. They weren't deregistered. This latest case seems to be more of an attack on religion than anything else. Yeah. What's your take on that, David? Or on the yesterday, on that teacher who's been stood down?
Yeah, that's what it looks like. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just, we've got this other thing happening, haven't we, in society, where if you have a a view that has a tendency to be on the conservative side, you're getting slammed real hard, and it's very, very sad. It's not going to help Kiwis. It's not going to help us in schools. It's very, very sad.
Well, it's not just sad, it's actually against the law. I mean, it's part of the, I've written an article outlining the Universal Declaration of Rights, as well as the civil and political rights in our New Zealand Bill of Rights. And I've stated all of the sections where, what happened to that teacher is against his right to, as a Christian, for example, or somebody who has a belief, any belief, that you are entitled to that belief, you're entitled to impart that information as well, and to hold those beliefs. So what the school has in fact done, whether he's a Christian or not, but clearly it seems to be the Christians who are being, like you said, under attack, or like what Carl has said, as soon as it's a Christian who's saying something, it's like, whoa, what happened to their rights all of a sudden?
Well, absolutely. So it makes you wonder about all sorts of things. Who in the Teachers' Council made that decision? Was it a committee? Was it an individual? Was it coming down from above the Teachers' Council? How did they arrive at that? Gets back to who are getting these jobs in these organisations. What are the criteria?
Which is why I want to talk to that teacher, so that I can find out a bit more detail and we can help him. We can actually help him out and help him with a case. So if you're out there, if you know him, get in touch. And is there any questions around that? Does anyone want to add anything else? I know we've still got just under 10 minutes. Is there anything else you would like to add, David, as far as those teachers who are out there who are struggling, the principals, the school leaders, even the teachers who are struggling in this, knowing that the Teachers' Council have made a way to embed this within all our standards so that you cannot go against it, even to the point of having to display different rainbowy effects, because the inside out, what they're doing is they are training young people to go into, to be in your school and say, well, if you don't have anything rainbow, you can question your teacher, your principal, your board of trustees, and basically say you're being discriminated because they're not displaying those items. I mean, this is how severe it's getting. They're training children to advocate for themselves.
Right. It is a big problem, isn't it? In terms, I heard Geoffrey Palmer, the ex Prime Minister, after years ago, he was a constitutional lawyer. He's even remarked that the constitutional arrangements that New Zealand has are open for this. It's not like a US constitution. It's a bit too. It moves around a lot. So I guess legal advice is the only way to go on that one. There is an incident recently I think it's in the northern eastern side of the United States, where the students themselves have been pushing back against some of what the teachers are doing, in terms of having celebrations around things that are very opposing the values of their families. So they've gone to the school and done exactly the opposite. So we're once again, these cultural shifts that we're seeing are very divisive, and people are taking far right, far left stands, and we're forgetting about the middle and being sensitive to each other's needs and attempting to get along well together. We're not being nasty to one another, but think through. I see this Teachers' Council is using a sledgehammer on something that's not needed. It's crazy.
I also feel like the diversity only goes one way, right? well, the left way, the left way is all good. The more diverse, the better. And as soon as there's some conservative voices, they're being pushed out at the moment. But look, thank you so much for that reminder. I think this is a really beautiful way of finishing this conversation, pointing out that it's, the more polarized and the more divided we're getting, the harder it's going to become, to find that common ground and to come back to the middle again. That was a really beautiful reminder. And I like that this is kind of, concluding this, even though, of course, there's more work to be done, lots more. But if both sides can see it like that and be respectful and mindful towards the needs of the other groups, that would be lovely. That would be the kind of world that I would like to live in. Yeah.
Yeah, just without taking it away from the parents, right? So, because that's pretty severe in the school system right now. But I do agree with both of you around that. We need to be able to have these conversations respectfully and understand each other. So, yeah, we will finish up. But, David, if you can just hang there for a couple of minutes and we'll have a quick chat at the end. Thank you to the audience. It's been great, as usual, to see you out there and to have your questions and your comments. Sorry if we've missed anybody. Azian and Bronnie will be back next week. I am in Auckland again soon, and so I may not be here next week. I might be, but anyway, you'll see some of us here. And if you have any questions, I think Azian's quite keen to get some of the audience in on the panel to talk about how we will go further. Is that correct, Azian?
That's right. I would really like a few of our regular ones coming on and have a little bit of a conversation around where to from here. What is it that our movement really wants? What are some goals that we can work towards? And of course, bring your ideas. How are we going to make it happen? So I would love it. So if you do want to come on to the panel next week, please reach out, send us a private message on our page, Real Women NZ. That would be awesome, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, everyone, good night, and we'll see you either.
I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much from us, and thank you, David, for coming on. It was very interesting.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Have a good night.